I have always been someone who prefers the quiet, the kind of person who enjoys a simple getaway rather than the hustle and bustle of city life. So, when I stumbled upon an Airbnb listing in a remote part of the countryside, I thought it would be the perfect weekend retreat. The photos on the site showed a charming cottage, surrounded by thick woods, with a fireplace that promised warmth and relaxation. The host, an older woman named Margaret, seemed nice enough in her messages, though there was something a little off about her responses. She was always overly formal, like she was trying too hard to be pleasant. I arrived on a Friday evening, the sun dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the narrow road that led up to the cottage. The place was even more isolated than I expected. No neighbors in sight, just the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional distant sound of an animal. I shrugged it off as part of the charm, though my phone had no signal here. Margaret greeted me at the door with a tight smile, her thin hands gripping the doorknob just a little too tightly. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft but carrying a peculiar edge. I trust the journey wasn't too troubling. I nodded and smiled, but something about her gaze, intense, unwavering, made me feel a little uncomfortable. She showed me inside, and the house was beautiful. Wooden floors, antique furniture, and that cozy smell of old books and burning wood. A fire crackled softly in the living room hearth, and the ambiance made me relax. Margaret offered me some tea, which I accepted gratefully. The night unfolded in the usual manner, but as I settled into bed, a feeling of unease lingered in my chest. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the soft creaks of the old building seemed to echo around me. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard it. A soft thumping sound coming from somewhere downstairs. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the house settling. But the noise persisted. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was nothing, but the unease wouldn't leave. The next morning, I woke up to find the kitchen completely cleaned. Not just the counters and dishes, everything. The floor swept, the tables polished. I hadn't even used the kitchen the night before. I was confused, but thought maybe Margaret had come in to tidy up. I'd barely noticed her leave this morning, but I was so caught up in my own thoughts that I didn't think much of it. But then the strange things started happening. The clocks in the house, every single one of them, stopped at the same time, 2:47 a.m. I double-checked them all, one by one. They hadn't just stopped, they had been reset, as if someone had manually turned them all back. I asked Margaret about it when she returned later, but she just gave me a strange look and shrugged. "Oh, those clocks," she said, her voice soft and distant. "They've always done that. Nothing to worry about." I didn't press it, but the sense of dread was growing. Every little detail seemed to be off. Margaret's smile lingered too long. Her eyes never quite left mine. And the house itself, it felt like it was watching me. At night, the noises grew worse. I could hear whispering coming from behind the walls, soft murmurs that I couldn't quite make out. At first, I thought it was the wind, but I soon realized there were no windows open. The next evening, as I sat in the living room, trying to ignore the gnawing fear in my gut, I noticed something chilling. The mirror on the wall across from me had fogged up as if someone had been standing in front of it, but no one had been there. The condensation began to form words. I couldn't breathe. The words were barely legible at first, but they became clearer. "Get out." I stumbled back from the mirror, my heart racing. The entire room seemed to close in on me. The walls, the floor, the air. It was suffocating. I ran to the front door, but it wouldn't open. It was as if it had been locked from the outside. Desperate, I pounded on it, calling for Margaret, but there was no answer. I ran upstairs, terrified, looking for a way out, but the house seemed to have transformed into a maze. The hallways twisted, the doors no longer led to the rooms I remembered. Panic surged in me as I ran down another corridor and stumbled into a room I hadn't seen before. It was small, dark and cramped, with an old rocking chair in the corner. As I stepped closer to inspect, I froze. In the chair was a figure, pale, with hollow eyes staring at me, its mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. I screamed, but no sound came out. The figure stood up slowly, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. Then a voice, Margaret's voice, whispered, "You should have never come." I ran. I ran so fast I didn't care where I was going, just that I needed to leave. I finally managed to break open a window, crawling through the sharp shards of glass and into the cold night. I didn't stop until I was miles away, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I never went back. The police never found anything unusual about the house, and when I checked the listing, it had been removed. But to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still in that house, waiting. I have always been the kind of person who appreciates simplicity. So when I found the Airbnb listing, it felt like the perfect escape. A small cottage in the middle of nowhere, tucked away in the rolling hills. The listing promised a peaceful weekend away from the city's chaos. No internet, no distractions. Just me, nature, and a comfortable bed. When I arrived, the place seemed charming. The cottage was quaint, an old stone structure with ivy creeping up the walls and a wooden porch swing that creaked softly in the wind. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine and damp earth. I couldn't help but smile as I stepped out of my car and stretched. The silence here was thick, the kind that you only get when you're far from civilization. I was looking forward to the solitude. The host, a middle-aged woman named Vera, greeted me with a warm smile and a handshake. She seemed kind enough, though her eyes had a strange, intense gleam to them. She explained the house rules. No loud noises after dark, keep the windows closed at night, and always lock the doors. Simple, really. As she showed me around, she kept mentioning the history of the house, how it had been in her family for generations, how it had seen a lot of interesting things over the years. I chalked it up to quirky local folklore. As the day wore on, the sun dipped behind the hills, and the cottage seemed to settle into the surrounding wilderness. I lit a fire in the small hearth and cracked open a bottle of wine, making myself comfortable. The place had an old lived-in feel, not just in the furniture but in the air. The wood floors creaked when I moved, and there was a constant draft, even though the windows were shut tight. A shiver ran down my spine, but I shook it off. The first night was uneventful, but around 2 a.m., I woke to a faint sound. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it was coming from the room next to mine. The sound was soft, like someone whispering, too quiet to make out, but unmistakable. My heart raced. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an animal outside, or the house settling. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to sleep. The next morning, I found myself uneasy. My eyes kept darting to the door to the next room, which I hadn't used yet. I told myself I was just being paranoid. It was an old house. Old houses creaked. They groaned. Still, as the day passed and the whispers came again, this time louder and clearer, I couldn't ignore it. That night, I decided to investigate. I tried to ignore the rising sense of dread in my chest as I stood in front of the door to the room next door. The whispers were unmistakable now, soft, almost pleading. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold, despite the warmth of the fire in the living room. I twisted it slowly, the door creaking open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the slivers of moonlight streaming through the small window. There was nothing there. Nothing but a small, dusty chair in the center of the room and an old wardrobe against the far wall. The whispers had stopped, but the air felt heavy, oppressive. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The smell of dampness was stronger in here. I scanned the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. Then I saw it. A figure, just a shadow really, standing in the corner by the wardrobe. It was too tall, too thin. It didn't move, but I could feel its eyes on me, though it had no face. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I turned, my eyes never leaving the shadow, and fled from the room, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, clutching my phone and desperately searching for any explanation. The internet was down, the signal lost as soon as I left the porch. The air felt like it was pressing in on me, suffocating. I tried to call Vera, but there was no answer. I wanted to leave, to get in my car and drive away from this place. But something kept me rooted to the cottage. It was as if the house itself was holding me here. The next morning I woke to the soft sound of footsteps outside the door. I held my breath, waiting. Then the door opened. Vera stood there, her smile too wide, her eyes glinting in a way that made my stomach churn. "I hope you slept well," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just grabbed my things and fled. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the car, that something was watching me. The whispers from the next room echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing mile. I didn't want to go back to that cottage, but a small part of me wondered, just for a moment, if Vera had been the one whispering all along, or if something else had been. I have always been the type to seek out the odd and unusual, so when I saw the listing for the old hotel on the outskirts of town, I was intrigued. The pictures were dated. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades, but that's exactly what made it so appealing. I was looking for something different, something out of the ordinary for a weekend getaway. And besides, the reviews, though sparse, mentioned nothing too alarming, just the usual about creaky floors and character. Nothing that made me think twice. When I arrived, the hotel felt abandoned. The lobby was dimly lit with heavy curtains that shut out most of the daylight, giving the place an eerie, almost haunted atmosphere. The receptionist, a middle-aged man named Greg, was unusually quiet but friendly enough. He handed me the key to room 666, giving me a strange look as he did so. "Enjoy your stay," he said, his voice almost mechanical. There was something unsettling about his tone, but I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe he didn't get many visitors. I couldn't help but laugh to myself. Room 666. A bit on the nose, wasn't it? But I liked it. I was ready for an adventure, even if it was just for a weekend. The hall leading to my room was long, with faded wallpaper peeling in places. It felt like the kind of hotel where people had stayed decades ago, but no one had been around in years. The air had that stale, forgotten quality to it, as if the rooms hadn't been disturbed in ages. Room 666 was at the end of the hall, the last door on the left. As I approached, I noticed the door seemed wrong. It was darker than the other doors, like it absorbed the light around it. I hesitated for a second before sliding the key into the lock. The room was cold when I entered. Not just a little cold, but a sharp, biting cold, like the air in the room had been trapped for years. The lights flickered as I switched them on, casting strange, distorted shadows on the walls. The furniture was old, the bed covered in a heavy, faded quilt. The room felt suffocating, as if it were alive, pressing in on me from all sides. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just an old hotel. Maybe the HVAC system was broken, or the room hadn't been aired out in a while. I set my suitcase on the bed, unpacked a bit, and then tried to distract myself by reading a book. But the longer I stayed in that room, the more uneasy I became. I kept hearing strange noises. The soft shuffle of footsteps in the hall, the faint sound of whispers just beyond my hearing. At first I thought it was just the old building settling, but it was persistent. It didn't feel like a natural sound. It felt like something was watching me, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The clock on the nightstand ticked loudly, echoing in the silence. I tried to ignore it, but it felt like the ticking was getting louder, faster, more frantic. Every second was unbearable. Then the door to the bathroom creaked open by itself. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I slowly turned my head toward the bathroom. I didn't remember leaving it open. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like lead. My pulse pounded in my ears, my breath shallow as I slowly approached the door. There was no sign of anyone in the bathroom, but the air was thick with something, an energy I couldn't quite name, something wrong, unnatural. I stepped closer to the door frame, peering inside. That's when I saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing in the corner of the bathroom. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but then it moved. Slowly, unnervingly, it stepped forward, revealing the pale, gaunt face of a woman, her eyes hollow and dark, her skin ashen. She didn't blink. She didn't move her mouth when she spoke, but I heard her voice, loud and clear in my mind. "You're not supposed to be here." My heart skipped a beat. I stumbled back, hitting the wall behind me. But the figure didn't advance. It just stood there staring at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, my voice gone. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her, from that impossibly still form in the corner. Suddenly the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and I was left standing there, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I fumbled for my phone, trying to turn on the flashlight, but before I could, the figure was gone. The air felt heavier now, like the walls themselves were closing in. The whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around me like a storm. I turned in a panic, looking for a way out, but the door had disappeared. It was just a blank wall now. No handle, no keyhole. Then I heard the knock. Slow, deliberate, echoing from the other side of the wall where the door used to be. Knock, knock, knock. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block it out, but it wouldn't stop. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. The whispers grew louder, the knocking incessant, and in the distance, I heard a voice I knew but couldn't place. Stay with us forever. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. The lights flickered back on. The door reappeared as if nothing had happened. I didn't hesitate for a second. I grabbed my things, bolted out of the room, and never looked back. When I checked out the next morning, Greg was sitting behind the desk, looking as impassive as ever. I was too shaken to say anything, but he handed me a receipt with a strange, knowing look. "Thank you for staying with us," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I trust you'll never forget room 666. I haven't been able to shake the memory of that night. The darkness, the whispers, the woman in the corner. I'll never forget room 666, and I'll never stay in a hotel again." I never thought much about Airbnb before. Sure, I'd heard the horror stories, the weird reviews about strange hosts or creepy places, but I figured they were just exaggerations. But when I needed a place to stay on a last-minute trip to the city, I didn't have many options. A small listing popped up, and it seemed perfect. Cheap, clean, and conveniently located. The photos were almost too pristine, the kind that made you think, this can't be real. But I was desperate. The host, an older man named Mr. McAllister, seemed nice enough through messages. He greeted me with a warm, almost too eager welcome when I arrived. His house was older, with a lot of charm, the kind of place that felt like it had seen generations of stories. The walls were filled with portraits, some black and white, others in shades of sepia, showing faces of people I didn't recognize. It was cozy, but there was a lingering oddness to it, like stepping into a place that wasn't meant to be visited by outsiders. The room I was assigned was upstairs. It had a single bed with a heavy quilt, an antique dresser, and a window that overlooked the street below. The air felt thick in the room, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The house creaked, like it was alive. Each step felt as though the floorboards were sighing under my weight. But I dismissed it. Houses are old. They make noise. After settling in, I went out for dinner. When I returned, the house was strangely quiet. Too quiet. I expected to hear the hum of the television or the soft clink of dishes in the kitchen, but there was nothing. It felt like I was the only one there. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. McAllister. "Hope you're comfortable. Dinner is ready if you'd like to join me." It was already late, so I politely declined. I wasn't in the mood to socialize, but his invitation struck me as odd. Dinner? At this hour? I shut the door behind me and locked it, despite the fact that the house felt perfectly safe. The house grew colder as I sat down to check emails, the quiet becoming almost oppressive, and then I heard it, a soft tapping. It was faint at first, but as the minutes passed it grew louder, like someone gently knocking at the door. I froze, heart pounding. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stared at the door for what felt like an eternity, my breath shallow. The tapping continued, persistent, as if urging me to open it. But I stayed still, telling myself it was just my imagination. Then the voice came. "Come out," it whispered, too soft to distinguish whether it was inside my room or coming from somewhere deeper in the house. "Come out and see." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. A few minutes passed in complete silence. Then from below, I heard it. A distant muffled sound. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and seemed to be getting closer. "Mr. McAllister?" I thought, but something about the rhythm of the footsteps was off. Too slow, too measured, like someone was dragging their feet. The door opened before I could stop myself. Nothing was there. I rushed to the hallway, but it was empty, bathed in the dim light of an old lamp. My stomach twisted with dread. The silence hung heavy, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. I turned and started to head back to my room when I saw it. Another figure standing at the end of the hallway. A shape, standing perfectly still in the shadow. Too tall, too thin. The figure didn't move. It was as if it was waiting for me, waiting for something. I wanted to scream, to turn and run, but my body refused to obey. The figure was watching me, its presence suffocating. I took a step back, and the figure shifted. It was gone. I slammed my door shut, the lock clicking into place. My heart hammered against my chest, but all I could hear was the sound of my own panicked breath. It didn't stop. The knocking returned, louder this time, more insistent. A voice joined it, whispering incoherently, snippets of words I couldn't understand. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, desperately trying to text Mr. McAllister, but the signal was dead. The Wi-Fi wouldn't work either. I was trapped. The house groaned, as if settling in its old bones. A door slammed somewhere below, and I heard a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a hiss like a whisper, coming from the walls. "Help me." The words floated through the air, barely audible, as if coming from inside the very foundation of the house. "Help me." I grabbed my things, heart racing, desperate to leave. I ran down the stairs, but the front door wouldn't open. I twisted the knob, threw my shoulder against it, but it was as though the door was sealed shut from the outside. And then I saw him, Mr. McAllister, standing in the doorway of the living room, his face twisted in a grotesque grin. His eyes were wide, unblinking, like he was watching me through a veil of something far deeper than mere curiosity. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. I bolted. I didn't look back as I ran out of that house, my feet pounding on the gravel, my chest burning with every step. I made it to my car, and just as I turned the key, I saw the house in my rearview mirror, standing still, watching me. The last thing I heard as I sped away was the faint sound of knocking, like someone, or something, was still waiting for me. I never went back to that Airbnb, and I'm not sure I ever will. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just a weekend getaway to a little cottage in the mountains, away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. The Airbnb listing was perfect. A small, cozy cabin tucked away on a quiet property. The photos were serene, the reviews glowing. I needed the peace, the quiet, the isolation. When I arrived, the place was exactly as described. It was nestled between two towering trees, with a stone pathway leading up to the porch, the kind of place you see in movies, a hidden retreat far from civilization. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the wind rustling through the leaves and the occasional bird call. I was already beginning to unwind. The host, a woman named Carol, greeted me with a warm smile when I arrived. She was older, her skin wrinkled, but her eyes sharp and clear. She handed me the key without much ceremony and reminded me to lock the doors at night. "It's a quiet neighborhood, but best to be safe," she added, with a look that seemed to carry more weight than it should have. I nodded, unsure what she meant by that, but I figured it was just small-town caution. The place felt peaceful enough, and I had no reason to doubt her words. The first night was uneventful. I cooked dinner, had a glass of wine, and relaxed in front of the fire. But when I went to bed, I noticed something strange. The key to the cabin, the one Carol had given me, was gone. I always left it on the small table by the door, but it wasn't there anymore. I checked the pockets of my jacket, my bag, and even under the couch cushions. Nothing. At first I thought I had just misplaced it. Maybe I'd picked it up absent-mindedly and put it somewhere else. But after checking again and again, I realized I was sure I hadn't moved it. The key was gone, and that unsettled me more than I cared to admit. The door wasn't locked, but I had a bad feeling about this. I called Carol, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting her, but got no reply. The house seemed fine, locked from the inside, but it didn't feel right. It felt like something was waiting, just outside my vision, just beyond my awareness. That night I slept with the lights on, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be going on. I kept hearing things, the faint creak of floorboards, the rustle of something moving in the kitchen, but every time I got up to investigate, there was nothing, just silence, thick, suffocating silence. The next morning, the key reappeared. It was on the table, right where I'd left it the night before. I was almost too afraid to touch it, but I had no choice. I grabbed the key, and a shiver ran up my spine as I felt its cold metal against my palm. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew something was wrong. Carol still hadn't responded to my messages, and I didn't know what to do. Later, that afternoon, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I left the cabin, locking the door behind me. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the trees. I wandered down the stone pathway, the crunch of leaves beneath my feet the only sound breaking the stillness. The air was getting colder, and I hugged my jacket tighter around myself. As I walked, I found myself heading toward the woods. The path seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning, and soon I realized I had no idea where I was. The cabin was far behind me, and the woods around me were unnervingly quiet. Then I saw it. In the distance, through the trees, there was another cabin. It looked almost identical to the one I was staying in, but there was something off about it. Darker, more run down. The windows were cracked, the door hanging slightly ajar. It wasn't part of the Airbnb listing, and it certainly hadn't been mentioned by Carol. My curiosity got the better of me. I approached cautiously, feeling an odd pull toward the place. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. There was a key lying on the ground just outside the door. I knelt down to pick it up, and the moment my fingers brushed the cold metal, a sharp, dry wind blew through the trees, making the branches creak and groan. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, holding the key, and stepped closer to the cabin. I felt like I was being drawn in, as though someone was waiting for me inside. I hesitated at the door, the key feeling heavy in my hand. I looked down at the lock, then at the key in my hand, and felt an overwhelming urge to turn it, but something stopped me. I couldn't explain it. The feeling of dread that washed over me in that moment was so intense I almost dropped the key and ran. My mind screamed at me to leave, to turn around and never look back. I backed away slowly, still holding the key, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open behind me, but I didn't turn around to look. I just ran. When I finally reached the cabin where I was staying, I locked the door and collapsed on the couch. I never went back to that cabin in the woods, and I never found out who or what had left that key there. But I know one thing for sure. Carol's warning about locking the door at night wasn't just for my safety. It was a warning to keep something out, and I'm afraid that something is still out there, waiting for me to open the door again.